All right, and we are live after some time off, Rosemary. Right? Welcome, Rosemary, to Everything Is Attitude.
Oh,
Uh,
thank you.
Welcome back. I know you had some great family time going on there, so I'm sure you enjoyed that.
I
Uh,
did, but
yep,
let's just dive in with an everything is attitude thing before we start on what we're actually going to be talking about today. Because
sure.
you just said I'm sure you had a great time, and I actually had a really fantastic time. Despite, sorry, I've got an itchy nose. I'm going to be vexed. Does that mean I'm going to be vexed?
Be careful, Rosemary.
I
You
know.
you you may get into a fight.
Superstition says that I'm going
Did
to
you
be
do that
vexed.
on
My
purpose?
nose is itching, right? Did I do that on purpose? Would I do
Yeah.
such a thing? Um, but I actually, the journey to New York was horrendous. I mean, I was actually sitting on a plane for over 12 hours. Uh, 3 hours, 3 or 4 hours wait before because the plane was delayed, then having to turn around and go somewhere else because we ran out of fuel, and then we had to refuel, and on it went. And consequently, all that sitting and literally sitting on they wouldn't let us off the plane, sitting on the plane for 12 hours. My back did a number on me, and my knees did a number on me. And so I sort of finally limped into my daughter's apartment. Literally, I felt like an old lady. I felt I need a walker because I could barely walk with the stress of it. And of course, I have trouble with my back anyway. Um, but I had then two choices because I was there for 3 weeks, and I either sit and moan and complain because my back was, the whole time I was there, I had trouble with my back the entire time. But I'd made promises. So I think we should have a show about making promises, how we should make promises, should we ever make a promise, and if we make a promise, how bad is it if we break it? What do you think to that for an idea of a show? But
I,
just
I think it's a great idea for a show.
but I when I make a promise, I rarely make a promise, but when I make a promise, I have to keep it, and that's the end of that. And I'd made promises to bake, I'd made promises to go to Coney Island, I'd made promises to go on the train, I'd made promises to do all these things with my grandson. I laughed because the first when I first said to him that I was coming, I asked, "What shall we do?" And he looked at me and he said, "Play." It's like, let's play. So I made promises to play. So regardless of the back and the knees and all that other stuff that went on, I really did have a great time because everything is attitude, right, Alan?
Ye- Exactly.
So, what
Yes.
is our topic today?
Well, I mean, we could look at today's date to
Uh
start, right?
oh.
Which is
Uh
what?
oh.
So we were looking before we went live, and it's actually a very rare occurrence. It is Friday the 13th, which we have superstitions about, right, Rosemary? And
Lots of superstitions.
it's also a full moon. So it's a very rare thing to have a full moon, which is very spooky, and to be on Friday the 13th. So we have a couple of superstitions just being today, which is
And,
pretty neat.
and and of course our topic is about superstition, but I think it's interesting. I didn't actually know this until 5 minutes ago when I actually asked Alexa. My good old Alexa gives me all sorts of information, but I didn't realize that Friday the 13th will only occur between 1 and 3 times in any given year. Did you know that, Al, that it was that rare that we had a Friday the
Only
13th?
because I just read it before the show as well.
So we're doing our homework just a little bit late. Excuse me, but yeah. So first of all, it's rare. So I mean, and Halloween is coming up. And yesterday on my the YouTube show, the Spirit World Sees All, we've started a little competition, which people have a whole month until I think the 4th or 5th or something like that of October. When is Halloween? Is it sometime 31st of
31st. Yep, October 31st.
um,
Yep.
so basically, I really would like people to write in and let us know all about any superstitions that they know of. I have a trillion that I know of. I'm sure you do too, Al. You know that your nose is itching, and so that means you're going to be vexed. Spilling the salt, you have to put it. You have to pick it up and throw it over your left shoulder. But it's intriguing to me where all of these superstitions came from. And talking about New York and being with my grandson, who is, of course, only 6 years old, I meant to say that, we were, he plays this game because in New York, the pavements are not exactly perfect. There are lots of cracks everywhere. So we play the game of you can't walk on a crack. And I remember doing this when I was a kid. You know, you can't walk on a crack because I don't know. I don't know. It's unlucky, I think. Where on earth do these things come from? And so, even sort of, when I was a kid, we're talking about at least 200 years ago. And now we've got Reese, who's 6 years old. He's doing the same thing that I did when I was a kid, not walking on cracks and having those weird superstitions that we have. Where do they come from? What are they about? So our competition. So I mentioned the competition. I can see you moving about trying to find a good spot. Um, our competition is about sending in to my email, to my office, sending in any superstition that you can think of. And the best three, they can be funny, they can be weird, they can be something I've never heard of before, whatever. I get to choose, unfortunately, because, hey, this is my competition. So I get to choose the three most intriguing or fascinating superstitions, and the three people uh, who are chosen get my new book, which is A Walk in the Clouds, and they also get the CD of my first book, The Eagle and the Rose. So the first book and the last book, they're going to get all of that. Unfortunately, the competition only applies to people in the USA because otherwise we have to deal with customs and all of that sort of thing. And and it also only applies if you are a subscriber of my YouTube channel. So if you want to join in, get going, that's what you have to do. And if you are not in the US and you're not, that means you're not eligible for the book. You can still send me your fascinating, I'm hoping, fascinating information about the superstitions that you might know of and so on, because I'd love to hear from you. And in order to do that, you need to email me, rosemary@rosemaryaltea.com. Alan will put that up in a bit, won't you? Just make sure that the subject line is contest or competition about superstitions. That's all I'm saying about that. Let's get back to Friday the 13th and
Rosemary, so we talk about these superstitions, and you mentioned we used to say you step on a crack, you break your mama's back. That was what we said as a kid.
yeah, that's
Um,
right.
yeah. So, and I think it ranged from mama's back to uncle's back to brother's back or to whatever, right?
Yeah.
Whatever flowed the most. But what do superstitions have to do with attitude, right? And that's what we want to talk about a little bit too. Why do people have these superstitions? Why do people do it? Sort of get to the root, like you always say, right? And what does that have to do with attitude? How does either knocking on wood for good luck or not, how does that affect someone's attitude? That's what we really want to talk to today, Rosemary, correct?
Yeah, I think so, because I really, well, first of all, let's come back to, can we come back to the full moon
Yep.
and to see if there's any, there's, you know, is this superstition of the full moon, is it grounded? Are the concerns real? Is there any cause for distress? or concern if we don't throw salt over our shoulder, for instance, when we spirit. Or and with the full moon, you said that you know someone who was affected by this full moon. Why don't you tell us that story first?
So yeah, so growing up, I had a relative that was, I'll say, more irritable, more testy. Every time there was a full moon, and actually, if you look at like the research behind it, there are some things that say that because our bodies are so much water, that the full moon can affect us notionally, but not like the extent of that we don't know. But this person, every time would get really irritable and really uptight. We would always, in my family, my it was actually my mother, but my father would always say it's a full moon. Mom's not not acting great because it's a full moon, and I think we kind of growing up started to believe that because of the full moon, my mom was getting irritable, or she was angry. Now it may have been complete coincidence that that was happening, but the superstition that we had was a full moon. You know, the werewolf comes out and it affects people in strange ways, and we believed it. And even today, I still, when it's a full moon,
Still
and
remember
something
your mother.
happens. Well, yeah, I still remember my mother, but also like if someone's do something crazy, it's very easy to say, "Oh, it's a full moon." That's why everybody's acting crazy. When everybody could act crazy on another day, and the full moon's not out, and they're not saying it's the full moon.
Well,
But
I
yeah,
I had a similar situation. I had a father-in-law who was really seriously affected, no doubts whatsoever, by the full moon. It would start somewhere around 2 or 3 or 4 days prior, and during that full moon, and then 3 or 4 days after. So you had probably a week or so, just maybe just a week, where I mean he would behave really strangely, and there was absolutely no doubt about it. And my mother-in-law always used to say, "Oh, it's the full moon," and people say it's a flippant thing to say, but he seriously was, and you could literally time it, and you could literally, sort of watch him go from a normal sort of regular guy to this completely, sort of mood swings, irritability, anxious, sharp, individual. And then as we came out of the moon and I get a full moon, he would literally start to, um, you know, get back to normal, so to speak. And I think there is something in it, in that I don't know if it's that we're so much water and so on, but if you look at the moon, if you look at the planets, if you look at our planetary system, everything is about energy. And I think that some people are more affected, some more positively and some more adversely. I mean, if you look at the stargazers, you look at the horoscopes, apparently we're all supposed to be affected by the planets and the planetary action and reactions and interactions. So I do think that there is some substance to people sort of, you know, being affected by the planetary system and the tides and the what happens to the earth as the moon sort of waxes and wanes. So, and I do think there are people who are sensitive to that. So not every superstition, we shouldn't dismiss, I think, every superstition. We shouldn't dismiss certain things. I mean, and also, if you look, I can remember I was in Vermont a few years ago, and I lived in the mountains. And where I lived was sort of halfway up a mountainous area. You were there, Al, you've been there, so you know what
hmm
I'm talking about. But the entire house, and it was called the Upper Hollow, the entire area was literally, you were literally surrounded by mountains. And I can remember, actually, it was so scary. This thing was so scary. I was on my own in the middle of nowhere. and it was a full moon, so the sky was really quite bright. And I can't remember what time it was. It was sort of late in the evening, and I could hear this howling. And then, and it was some sort of whether it was a coyote or whatever it was howling. And then there was another howling, and then there was another howling. And I walked outside into my driveway, literally surrounded by mountains and literally surrounded by this pack or several packs, because one seemed to start it and then and then set off all of the others. And it was so scary to stand in the middle of all of this with all of these coyotes around. Not that I could see them, but you could hear them clearly. And they were howling and literally baying at the moon. I mean, that's what they were doing. And I stood there, I tell you, it was so creepy. It made that, that my back, my spine, it sort of made my hair stand on end. It was the creepiest thing. But it's about the energy, I think. And it's all, so we shouldn't dismiss superstitions. But of course, Halloween is coming up, and Friday the 13th. And this is when we start to expect all the spooky stuff. And there are a lot of people who are seriously affected. I mean, and really believe and are affected. Their mental state, their emotional state is very affected by, all of this, all of the superstitions, which we can so easily say, oh, let's bung it all together, it's all nonsense. Some of it, I think, based on, I mean, I know that I'm trying to think which country it was, and whether it's Egypt or somewhere where the salt thing came from. They believe that if you as you're cooking, if you throw salt over your left shoulder, it means that you're going to, get rid of the witches and the evil and any little gremlins who might want to disturb or disrupt your cooking. And it also means that your food tastes better. I mean, where these things come from is perhaps not so much the issue that we should talk about today, but are people affected by it? Uh, are people's attitudes affected? Do people actually get into depressed states sometimes because of some things that are, that superstitions are rife in certain areas? Do people get into a negative state? And if so, what can we do about that? How do we combat people's fears and concerns over the superstitious stuff that goes on, which a lot is nonsense, I do believe. But I do believe also that there are some things that may have some real background to them.
Yeah, and the full moon may or may not be one of them. I think it's which comes first, the chicken or the egg. Is it the full moon that's affecting, or the awareness that it's a full moon, and then people get crazy because of that, right? You don't always know. But we talked earlier about um, at its root, like why people have these superstitions and why they follow through on changing their course of action throughout the day because of these superstitions. And it's really about keeping your energy in alignment, Rosemary. That's what we talked about. So it's, if we'll use the knock on wood. If you say something, you knock on wood for good luck. A lot of, at least here in the States, I don't know if it was a thing in England or not, but you knock on wood to
Very
make
much
sure.
so. Yeah, very much
Yeah,
so.
and if you don't knock on wood,
Well, if you
you
can't, if
feel,
you can't, if you can't find wood, then you knock on your head. So it's
yeah,
like
you knock on your head or you go
you're a
searching for wood
blockhead
or
or
whatever.
whatever. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So, but like the reason you do that is to sort of make sure that the path that you're on, energy wise, is in sync, right? Whether it goes negative, positive, whatever. It's to make sure you're in sync, right? That's
Well,
what we're talking about.
well, just in case,
Just
just
in case.
just in case there really is something to this. Let's just proceed. Let's knock on wood. Let's pick up that lucky penny. Let's do all the things that we are that are, let's not walk on the crack on the pavement. Let's
Yeah.
just in case. But I think there's something to be said for uh, building your energy anyway, regardless of whether you walk on the crack, regardless of whether you pick up the penny, pick up a penny all day.
Well,
What is it?
Rosemary, those are things that you can control, right? So you can knock on wood, you can pick up the penny, you can choose not to walk on the crack, but the stuff that comes into affecting us energy wise is a black cat cross your path, or you accidentally
Oh, yeah, yeah.
I mean, stuff you can't control. Then what do you do? Because the superstition can take over, essentially, right?
Well, I know that my mother used to get really panicked actually on New Year's Eve. It was a really big thing for her that you had to first of all have a stranger. Of course, it had to be somebody who didn't live in the house. I guess counted as a stranger. They were supposed to be tall and dark. Of course, they weren't always, but they were supposed to be tall and dark. And at the stroke of midnight on New Year's Eve, it was literally that you had to have someone knock on the door, and you open the door and allow them in, and they bring in with them a lump of coal and a piece of bread. And the lump of coal signifies that you're going to have warmth and heat or whatever, and the lump and the loaf of bread or the slice of bread signifies that you won't go hungry for that rest of that year. And as silly as it sounds, because we really know, don't we, that it's, I mean, whether somebody brings in coal or bread or something, it's not really going to make a great deal of difference, is it? But my mother, along with many other people, used to get really anxious if she couldn't find someone to do that little ritual. So these little rituals become very important to people. And I think, our attitude is, are we going to buy into that? Or are we going to, if we can't find anyone to bring us the coal and the bread and all the rest of it, what are we going to do for the rest of the year? We're going to worry that something might happen because we didn't follow through with that ritual? Or are we just going to understand that our attitude is about us? It's not about relying on somebody else to do something for us. It's about us, and we decide what our attitude is going to be, and we decide whether we have warmth and whether we have food to eat. So it's a question of literally understanding that for all of these superstitions, the majority of them have only can affect you if you will allow them to, if you buy into that. I mean, I certainly do not rely on throwing salt over my shoulder to produce a good meal. I've lost you, Al. I can't hear you.
Sorry, yeah.
Yeah,
Can you hear me now?
yeah, yeah,
Yes, and you mentioned it sort of when we were talking before, like this self-fulfilling prophecy. And I mentioned, the old adage: if you think you can, you're right. If you think you can't, you're right. And
yeah.
essentially, if you let that superstition affect you, that's what you're doing. Like if the black cat crosses your path and it ruins your day, it's not necessarily because the black cat crossed your path. It's that you're deciding that the black cat is going to affect you in a negative way, or positive. Like it could be a positive thing that you see too, and that affects you in a positive way. That's actually a good thing, right? But I think the
But
danger is when, yeah,
go ahead, go ahead.
I think the danger is when it comes to the stuff that really alters our day and affects uh, interactions that could have been positive throughout the day because we're changing what we're doing based on superstition, right?
Yeah, I mean, I know people. I know one or two people personally, but I know of a lot of people who are so affected by stuff like this that they rather not go out. They'd rather stay in because they get so worked up that Friday the 13th. No way are we going out. No way am I going to put myself in a situation where something bad can happen. the fact that a gas leak can happen in your house and blow you up if you stay in is neither here nor there, is it? It's like, but people and superstitions. I mean, it's people can, you have heard me say this before, people can only do to you what you allow them to do. And
Right.
consequently, if you allow yourself to become afraid, or if you allow yourself to become affected by the superstitious rituals in an adverse way, it's really not about the fact that you didn't follow the ritual. It's about the fact that you don't understand that, you know, your attitude is about what you do with it and how you perform and what you think. We have the power to override the black cat. We have the
Yeah.
power to override the salt. We have the power, we have the power to not actually knock on wood if we don't feel like it, because if
Right.
our attitude is positive, that is all we actually need.
Yeah, and I think it, like most topics we talk about, it transcends. Like we're talking about superstitions, but it really transcends into if you do let the black cat affect you, then are you going to let other things, or you likely are probably more likely to let other little things affect you that are out of your control, and that's where the attitude, having a positive attitude of like you say, let God and let go, is helpful. Like you can't, you I shouldn't say you can't. If you want to let that affect you, that's fine, but it is going to affect you in a negative way. With superstitions in particular, and other things that you can't control throughout the day.
But
You,
but how
if
but
you,
how it
yeah,
affects you, is your choice.
that's exactly right. Yes.
Each person has that choice, and I think that once people realize or come to terms with, am I going to let this problem or this disaster affect me? Am I going to let these people who say I should knock on wood, if I don't want to, am I going to let it eat this little worm that gets into your head, which eats away at you? Am I going to let that happen, or am I going to take charge of my own life, my own attitude? And I think that there are so many things that go on in life that people get affected by, and not just superstitions, but there are so many things that we where we allow other people to affect us. And we need to look at why do we do that? Why do we let other people affect us? Why do we not understand that we have the power to be and to think and to feel the way that we want to, and to override those negative issues that come along? We don't have to be affected. If you've got a bad back and there's a penny on the ground, and you know that if you don't pick it up, then you're missing an opportunity. Too bad for you. See a penny, pick it up all day long, you'll have good luck. Quite frankly, if my back is bad, I'm not going to bend down. Will that stop me
Pick up.
having good luck? It will not, because my attitude will be such that whatever happens is not reliant on the penny. It's reliant on me.
Right,
So
and you mentioned before, walking with your grandson, and you don't step on the cracks. And I think if you take these superstitions with sort of a grain of salt, no pun intended, right?
yeah,
Um, yeah, then it's a harmless thing, because if you want to knock on wood in conversation,
we were
is
just having
it?
fun. Yeah,
Yeah, it's not going to affect you. It's when you, like you said, you let it affect you in that negative way, that you're altering your decision making, or not doing, missing opportunities possibly because of something that's going on. That's where it becomes really detrimental, and your attitude and how you look at those things can flip that around completely, and turn it into a positive by, just like you said, dismissing that the fact that it should or should not bother you. Like, just don't let it bother you, and move on. And it's easy to say, because I think people back to your point, people have trouble. I think we talked recently about getting to the root of things, right? And I think it's easier to talk about, like, to complain about things, to talk about the symptoms of why people are acting, or worry about things rather than say step back, like you always say, and say, listen, what's going on here? Why am I really letting this affect me? It shouldn't affect me, and then do something positive so that it doesn't.
So
Right?
that it doesn't.
That's yeah, so that it doesn't.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
that's in essence, people get caught up in not just superstitions but other things that affect them, and get in this spiral that we talk about, right? This vicious spiral, downward spiral, because they're complaining, people are listening to them, then those people are complaining, this happened because of this and this, when the reality is they're
Here's
not
the
just
spiral
looking at,
going down.
yeah, the spiral down. Exactly, exactly.
Yeah.
And a superstition can do that, have that same effect.
I think that you know, there's one thing to have fun with this stuff, but there's another thing if you're going to take it seriously. I actually know of a lady who would she had a thing about clocks. She had a thing about doors. She lived her whole life in this sort of weird sort of idea of superstitions. If she went out of a door, she had to come back in the same door. If somebody else came to visit and they came in another door, she would insist they had to go out that same door. I mean, and then she had a thing about clocks. If the clock was a certain time, she wouldn't go out. She her whole life was centered eventually on, you know, she convinced herself that the spirit world were telling her that she couldn't go here and she couldn't do that, and if the clock said 12 she couldn't go out, she'd have to wait until 5 minutes past 12 to go. I mean, you can, you can, that's an extreme situation, I do admit, but at the same time, I mean, it's you know, if you're going to let these things affect you, and people do allow these things to affect them. I mean, you go into a hotel in certainly in the Eastern cultures, there are hotels actually all over the world that do not have a 13th floor. I don't know if you know that, but they do not have a 13th floor,
Yeah.
nor do they have a number 13 room. They'll go from a 12 to a 14, but there's no 13. And then there are of course, there are lots of hotels that do have a 13th floor, and there are lots of hotels that do have a room 13. And you can hear it. So, I mean, I've traveled all over the world. I've actually heard people arguing, no, I don't want that. That's, I'm not got, no, I don't want the number 13, thanks, for no other reason than, and these are business people. These are people who, are, you would think, quite sane. Why would you not go into that room because it's got the number 13 on it?
Well, Maggie actually has a comment, which I think we talked about the basis of some of these too, and is there really a basis to these things? And I think maybe some of them are, like we talked about the full moon, but she said she's wondering like how it's perpetuated. And I remember when I was younger, we were big baseball fans, and the Yankees, New York Yankees, were always in the thick of things with World Series and playoffs. And I remember vividly having to sit in a certain position with a hat in a certain way and not being able to move
Really?
because it would bring bad luck to the Yankees. And
Really?
you know, I and we believed it. Like we wouldn't move, we wouldn't switch our position. We would like I believed it as a kid, but I think to Maggie's question and point, like, is there basis for these things? I think once if someone does move and the Yankees were to get out or lose a game, then
Then
people
it's your
use that.
fault. It's your
Then
fault.
it's our fault. Like so, it's really easy. The black cat goes in front of somebody, and someone gets hit by a truck. Hey, see, we told you, right? And I think that's how these things are perpetuated.
Yeah, and I think that the grandmother and the great grandmother and the great great and so on, and I mean that we can blame them for a lot of this because old wives' tales turn into these superstitions, and some old wives' tales are simply old wives' tales, but there are, for a lot of superstitions that have do have a basis in fact, like the full moon. I'm trying to think of anything else that I know of, but a lot of the superstitions do have a basis somewhere, or a grain of truth somewhere, that pick up a penny, it'll bring you good luck. Well, think about it. Many, 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 many years ago, as I would say to my grandson when we were doing our quizzes, in the very, very olden days, uh, a penny was a great deal of money. You picked that penny up, it was good luck because it bought you a loaf of bread, or it bought, you know what I'm saying? What will it buy you now? Not a lot. But
Right.
it's still going on. But
And,
perhaps,
yeah, and Rosemary, going back to that self fulfilling prophecy too. Like over the years, if someone thinks that picking up a penny is good luck, they may have a better day because they have a better attitude the rest of the
everything is
day.
attitude.
Right,
Yeah.
and it's supporting over the years. It's, hey, that guy picked up a penny and then he won the lottery after that, but maybe he wouldn't have wanted to play the lottery after that, right? So it really, like, it's something where the energy around that could affect it negatively or positively, and that reinforces those superstitions too.
And again, speaking to Maggie, how are things perpetuated? Well, we do, don't we? We're human. We do like the intrigue, and we do like, oh, I picked that penny up and then he won the lottery. I mean, we do love those stories, don't we? Or that black came and then, or that black came cat came across me and then I fell. I mean, we do like we
Well,
kind of,
we love drama and
yeah.
color throughout the
So
day, and
we
right.
do, so it's his natural progression that these things are perpetuated. And I do have I'm not sure if it's a funny story. I felt that it was a funny story. I had years, I'm going back many, many years now. I had three young women who came to me for a consultation. And as they came in and they were sort of talking about the fact that they'd come across a dead bird. And the superstition is if you see a dead bird portends death, right? So they told me this, and I'm saying, well, don't worry about it. You're fine. They were worried because I talked to dead people, and they were worried that I might see their death because they'd seen this dead bird. So they got very concerned, but they got sort of all worked up about this stuff. So anyway, so I got a phone call 2 days later, and I said to them, "Don't worry about it, what have you." And I got a phone call from one of the girls, and she said, "Why didn't you tell us what was going to happen to us?" And I said, "I've no idea what you're talking about." And apparently, they left my house, got in the car, drove home, went to the pub for a drink, and then went back to one girl's house for something to eat, and literally tripped over a dead body. Some guy had actually collapsed. One of the neighbours had actually collapsed outside of their front gate, and one of the girls had tripped over this dead body. So now, of course, the dead bird that they saw earlier on that day now has meaning for them. The truth of the matter is they'd have tripped over the dead body anyway, wouldn't they? But did that dead bird portend that death? I thought it was funny. I thought it was a funny story. And of course, they were upset with me because they really, really believed that I must have known but just didn't tell them. And the truth is, I didn't know. I had no clue they
And
were going to trip
you
over a
wonder
dead
too,
body.
like, I think people will love to kind of perpetuate and support those superstitions, but those same people won't say that they had seen a dead bird on another day and something really wonderful happened to them, right? So like,
Yeah.
yeah, like, to be honest with yourself too, and really look, if you really want to dig into those superstitions, really see if there is a correlation, because there may not be the same correlation that you're thinking.
Well, what we need to do today, I think, Al, is everybody's out there. It is Friday the 13th.
With a
It
full
is a
moon.
it is a full moon. I'm building the drama here.
Yes, you are.
Friday the 13th. It's a full moon. Does
in your
this
spooky voice.
does this, of course I'm building it up. Does Does this mean then that we can expect the ghosts and the ghouls and the things that go bump in the night? Does this mean that we can expect them to come out tonight when the moon is very full? If we hear the coyotes howling, does this mean that it portends something really awful? Or does it simply mean that the energy is, I think, you see, if I love full moons, because I think the energy is really positive. I mean, you look at the tides, you look at how much the tides are affected by the moon and the, and especially in a full moon, the tides change, the tides turn. So, what does it mean for us, Al? Is it spooky, spooky? I mean, don't we love to be spooky? Don't we love it? These spooky stories. I'm wondering if I've got a ghost story which is connected to the full moon, but I actually don't. I don't think I should have thought earlier on. But I don't think I do have a ghost story. But as I'm talking, I'm laughing because I've got someone laughing behind me. Of course, you know who it is who's just laughing about, sort of people who see faces in the moon, and especially in the full moon, people do believe that they see faces in the moon, and they, uh, uh, is that true or not? What kind of an attitude should we have when we go to bed tonight and we're getting ready for bed? Should we be nervous because the spooks come out? Halloween is coming up. Should we be a little worried that something is going on, something is
Well,
going to happen
Ros-
because it's
Rosemary,
Halloween?
we could talk too, and maybe around Halloween we'll do this. We've had many a discussion on believing you're vulnerable makes you more vulnerable too, right? So, and there's something to that with the superstition piece too. And if you everybody's going out there and they're spooked out because there's the full moon and it's Friday the 13th, well, they may be more susceptible to that
I,
negative energy, right?
and God forbid you should see an owl tonight with the full moon.
Yes.
So what we're doing here is we're having a very positive attitude, and we're taking all of this with a little pinch of salt, and just having fun with it. So my suggestion to everybody
So,
out there
so
is just
that's a recipe ingredient, right?
right, just fun, fun, and more fun. With this, if you want to throw salt over your left shoulder, really, what harm is it? Except just make sure that nobody's behind you. You're gonna, throw it in their
No,
eye or
no small
something.
children. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, yeah. If you want to, I mean, Reese and I, we were playing with the cracks and what have you, and he was really serious about it. But then when we came to parts of the pavement that had sort of like cobblestone, well, he said, "Oh, this is a bridge. Let's have this is a bridge, so we can walk over that because it's a bridge." So and so there's that to it as well. So we choose when we're going to believe and when we're not going to believe, right? So my grandson
Yes.
chooses that we can't walk. I don't know if what he thinks is. I don't think he thinks that anything bad's going to happen if we walk on a crack. It's just that it's the game. Don't walk on the crack, but you can walk on the bridge on the or the little cracks because that's the bridge. So turning the negative into the positive, uh, you know, making something good out of something that perhaps is concerning or worrying. Will devastation happen to you if you do not knock on wood? Will it?
So, 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 honestly, though, you said having fun too. And I remember as a kid, you try, like we said before, you knock on wood, and if you can't find wood, you knock on your own head or somebody else's head, and you make a joke out
Yeah,
of it.
that's right.
And
Yeah, yeah.
that's really a good kind of micro lesson with all of this. Knocking on wood is a perfect example of that. If you can't find wood and you're going crazy and it affects your day, well, that's probably not the right thing to do. But if you can't find wood and you knock on your own head or someone else's head and joke around about it, that's a positive way to use superstitions. Like if you really want to do it and you really want to have fun with it, that's fine. It's not going to affect you from that point forward, right, is not going to affect your day in a negative way from that point forward.
If you don't allow it to. It's
If
about,
you don't
again,
allow it to.
it's
Exactly.
about understanding people, situations can only do to you what you allow them to do. You have the power. You're in control. You're in charge. One of the reasons that I'm curious about superstitions is not because of the power that they may or may not have, but the I'm intrigued as to the reasons why people thought these things up, and for instance, I think I mentioned on the show yesterday, every household, certainly in England, and I think probably in many countries, every household in medieval times would put garlic and a bunch of rosemary at every entrance going in or out of the house. So above the doorway that they would be hanging uh, garlic and rosemary. Above the windows, garlic and rosemary. It would, because it was supposed to keep the witches away. I guess the garlic smell would probably do that, and the rosemary has always been one of those herbs that brings good luck. It's for remembrance and so on. But sort of, and I know that as a rosemary myself, I certainly keep the witches away. I'm keeping all those negative
You
vibes.
just wanted to mention rosemary because of that.
But it is true that, and why was it that they chose rosemary above and beyond everything else? And this is the curiosity for me. So the curiosity for me about superstitions is not the superstition itself necessarily, or what it may or may not do to you, or how it may or may not change your attitude. I like the history behind those things. I really love the history and the intrigue as to where on earth this came from and why people, because in every culture around the world there were rituals and still are rituals that people really feel that they have to obey. Even, I mean, the Irish, the way that we bury our dead. I mean, uh, years ago we buried our dead and you'd have to tie a bell to the did you know this? You'd have to tie a bell to the toe of the dead person, and then put them in the coffin, and and it was a superstition, but it was based on the fact that if the person were not actually dead, because a lot of people were buried, they were simply in a coma or they were just having a blackout or something, they were considered to be dead. And the idea was that if you buried them in the coffin but they weren't dead, they could just shake their foot and ring the bell, and then somebody would hear it and open the coffin and realize that this person wasn't dead. So there are lots of superstitions that come from those kinds of things, tying a bell to your toe, or I'm trying to think of other things that people used to do. Lots and lots and lots of things that people used to do.
But rosemary, the human side, it's really a study of like human interaction and
Oh yeah,
social interaction, right?
yeah,
Because you have these things that were founded, they're rooted somewhere. There's like legitimacy at some point.
yeah.
The garlic and the rosemary is because they're healing herbs, and that's why they were used to begin with. Like, there's so much history like that I love as well. But then the perpetuation of it, and how people are reacting to it, is it's really a study and observation of human behavior as
But
to why, and that's why we started getting into like really talking about it even before this live broadcast, is why do people have these superstitions to begin with, and why do they
why do they
let them
why do they
affect them?
buy into
Yeah,
them?
why do they buy into them?
And
Yeah.
it's such a human thing to do, because first of all we're fascinated by it, and second of all it's like, all right, what do we do? We have a baby in its crib or what have you. What do we do? The first thing we do, we pick up the baby and we go boo, because it's so much fun to scare the baby. The baby gets scared like this, jumps and then giggles and laughs. So there's some human sort of need for us to sort of have the scary moments, and to have the fun. But when does it become, sort of to the point where we go from taking it with a pinch of salt, so to speak, and and going more so and getting, you know, getting these things that, because we're talking about things that have began hundreds of years ago,
Yeah,
that are
yeah, or more
still,
sometimes. Yeah, yeah.
going through grandmother to grandmother. I shouldn't just blame grandmothers. Grandfathers are just as bad
Grandfathers as well.
in their own way, but so
I
it
think,
sort of comes from the sort of generations of people.
and as kids, you believe. Like I was talking about,
Sure.
it wasn't too far back, but the sports and the superstitions with that. Like as a kid, I believed it because everybody was telling me it, and even today, like. I've gotten away from it, but I'm like, yeah, maybe I shouldn't move my seat if
Really?
yeah,
Really?
yeah, it's in the back. It's still in the back of
Is it?
my
Isn't
mind. And I
there?
think that's how it gets
Isn't there
perpetuated.
also? Isn't there also a thing in baseball about spitting? Maybe it's baseball or maybe it's football. You know, you got to spit on
Yeah, I
something.
mean there are thousands of superstitions
Right,
that
right.
play.
We can go on and on with this stuff. Yeah, and
I
also,
think too. Go ahead, Rosie. Sorry.
so no, there are people who, for instance, I know a person who used to have a flat stone that he kept in his pocket, and he put his hand in his pocket and he'd rub the stone in. It brought comfort to him, but it got to the point where if he didn't take the stone with him, it was a bad omen. He had to take the stone with him. He became reliant on it, and then all of a sudden, I think, one time his wife took the pants to the cleaners or something, and for a few minutes there, he thought he'd lost his stone, and all of a sudden, it was like the most dire thing that could possibly happen to him. I mean, me, I'd just go out and get another stone. But this one stone became this thing for him. And people hand down from generation to generation. They hand down these things, don't they? I mean, I'm saying all of this. I have in my purse, totally true. I've only just thought about it. I have, when my daughter was 2 years old, she loved 2 and 3 years old. She loved to wrap things, and so she'd wrap anything at all. So I think in the States you have gummy bears, right? Uh, well, in
Correct.
England,
Yes.
we in England we call them jelly babies. Sort of the same thing. Jelly babies are a little bit softer and more sugary than gummy bears, but it's the same little thing. And so my daughter was sort of wrapped up this jelly baby, and she wrapped it up. I wish my purse were handy and I'd show it to you, but she wrapped this up right when she was, what, 2 or 3 years old, and it's in green paper, and she put lots of tape over it and one thing and another, and she handed it to me, and to this day I have that in my purse. And we're going back, she's 40 something, so we're looking at more than 40, way more than 40 years, and I've carried this little gummy bear everywhere. Everywhere I've gone, I've carried this little jelly baby. And one time, about 10 years ago, I was flying from California and to New York, and I left my bag and my purse and everything behind, right, in a store. And I have to be honest, I have to tell you, in my bag, I had a couple of $1,000 at least in cash because I was traveling. I also had expensive jewelry in the bag and all sorts of other things. And I remember sitting on the plane, realizing before I got on the plane that I'd lost this, and I sat on the plane, and I remember thinking to myself, being having a great attitude, there's nothing in there that can't be replaced. There's absolutely nothing in that bag that cannot be replaced. I'm good. Don't get upset about it. It's fine. And then all of a sudden, I remembered my jelly baby. I remember, and a lump came in my throat, and tears formed in my eyes. I couldn't eat, I couldn't sleep. I was so upset that I'd lost this jelly baby. Fortunately, I recovered the bag with everything, even the money in it. I recovered everything because some honest shopkeeper found it and kept it for us. But for that moment, and actually it was a moment that lasted 2 or 3 days until I knew I was going to get it back. But that, is that sentiment. I really felt and still feel sort of a little bit, I don't know if it's superstitious or what it is, maybe a little bit superstitious that if I don't have it or if I lose it, it's going to be the worst thing in the world. And honest to God, it's just a little, and it's flattened and it's crystallized
But
and
you
it's,
but you've had it so long, right? And it's meaningful
and
to you, and
I
right.
cannot, yeah. And I bring it out, and now I also have my grandson's umbilical cord in there as well, and stuff like that. I mean, I'm a really weird person, but I carry I carry it with me. Is that? Would you say that would count as superstition?
I mean,
Because
it's a fine line between superstition and what and comforting things too. Because I think everybody, like you mentioned, the rock too, that the person had, and I think even with that, things that comfort you, you have. It's okay to have that, but if something does happen, you also have to be okay. Hey, listen, it upset me initially, but it's not the end of the world, and it happened, and there's nothing I can do about it, right? So
it
those
did feel though, Al. I have to be honest. I have to be really honest. I mean, there was some very beautiful, expensive jewelry in that bag. There was over $2,000 in money in that bag. There was other stuff in that bag. There was my passport in that bag, my
right,
driving license, all
and
of
the only
those
thing you
things.
cared about was the
You know, it was like, and I was fine. I had a good attitude. Well, it's all replaceable. And then it dawned on me, and I'm sitting on the plane with a big lump in my throat, tears in my eyes, trying fiercely not to cry in front of all the everybody on the plane. And I could not get my mind past that one thing, which would not be of any value to anybody else. You look at it, and you think, what the heck is that?
yeah,
And if you didn't know
yeah,
what it was, if I didn't tell you what it was, you'd never know what it was. So it's the weirdest thing, right? It's just it's the weirdest things that get us. It's the weirdest things
yeah.
that can pull us down. But I did have a very good and very positive attitude about everything else. I have to be honest, not with the jelly baby. Couldn't get my mind
Well,
past
that's
it.
listen. We're all human, right? And
Yeah.
sometimes things affect you, and but overall, our attitude is about not letting those things affect us on a daily basis, right? And that's how you maintain a positive attitude throughout the day. You're never going to stay there. We're never saying that, right, Rosemary? You're never going to stay
No.
positive full time. You're always going to have things like the jelly belly bear thing, whatever,
Maybe.
uh, baby.
Jelly. Well,
By the
jelly
way,
head. Jelly head.
my sister is on. By the way, my sister is on. She's flying back, and she mentioned watching Yankees games upside down on the couch because
Oh,
of
really?
superstitions, and I remember that too, and she's laughing about it.
Do we
We
have?
have
I mean, I know that we're
I,
we're in an odd.
yeah, I actually have to run pretty soon, but we have Terry. Terry said 36 years ago on Friday the 13th, they found $100 on the ground in the middle of nowhere. Ever since then, I don't think anything bad about Friday the
Good
13th.
for
So
you.
that's that
Yes,
thing,
good for
right?
you. Any
It's,
any other
it's supporting it the other way,
any other
right?
comments before we close
Um,
it?
Maggie says, I see Penny's a gift from heaven.
Yeah,
Uh, and she also says, I love owls. And yes, the moon has
me
a
too.
happy
Me
face.
too.
As, yeah, and that's pretty much it. So I
Oh,
think we're on a different time too, so we don't have probably as many people. But we're going to try and do this time next week.
yeah,
Yes, Rosemary,
yeah.
try and do the same
Yeah,
thing.
I think so. I'd also like to mention. I know you're in a rush to get off, but I'd like to mention that we are going to be doing. I've not spoken to you about this yet, but Chris and I are going to be doing live healing on Facebook. So I'm going to be doing live healing sessions on Facebook. We're going to try and set it up, whether it's once a week or whether it's once a month. We're not sure yet, but watch for that, everybody. So anyway, I'm shutting us down. Al, it's been fabulous. We've talked until we thought, we always say beforehand, do we have enough to talk about? And then we just don't stop talking. So
Yes, exactly.
thank you for being a great co-host. Thank you, people, for joining. All of you who missed this, I hope you watch it once it's recorded. Al, don't forget to post it. Just pointing my finger at you now. Don't forget to post it. And we shall see you next week. Keep watching. We always post on my Facebook. We also send out emails to everybody if you want to be on my email list. Rosemary at rosemaryanaltair.com. Al, if you want to be on Al's email list, Al at alpasano.com. Works, right? And so, until we see you again, it is Friday night, the beginning of the weekend. Have a very, very blessed day, everyone. Or rest of the day, should I say. And please, all of you, have a really wonderful weekend. Thanks, Al.